Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny. I'm here with Jack. Jack, how are you?
I'm doing very well. It's been a very busy season at Caesar Inc. and Caesar. Yeah, it's been busy. We've been going to conventions. We've been pushing Doomsong and our new upcoming Kickstarter. Thought I'd get that in right at the beginning of the the episode. Although it's not what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, well, we'll catch up on that because I'm curious about the some of the updates you've been working on for Doomsong. Which, if any of you haven't seen it, I'll put a link or something over here somewhere so you can check out that interview as well. Definitely worth your time. But today we're going to talk about some of your other works, particularly Labyrinth, the adventure game. I had to get this book. Opening the book, I find the book to be incredibly creative. But yes, let me ask you this: how did this fall in your lap? How did this come to be?
So it was quite a while ago now. It was let's say 2019, so 6 years ago now, and we were working with River Horse at the time. River Horse had already done the Labyrinth board game and sort of a couple of expansions around that, and had sort of a really good relationship with the Henson company. It was a big sort of big success, and they wanted to create an RPG, and it was a really small studio. Basically, Chris and I. Chris is my brother, and sort of the kind of the shadowy mastermind behind a lot of this. He essentially product managed everything and came up with a lot of the like iconic stuff about the product rather than the literal words on the page. And so we sort of had this free reign within the company where we were able to basically run away with the project and kind of get away with a lot of stuff. Well, I'm sure we'll get into a lot of the weird things that we sort of run into or sort of push into it. But the most sort of famous one is, of course, the dice hole in the book, which came out of this idea that we essentially wanted our target demographic was fans of Labyrinth, who are generally older, um, generally women, and generally like not. There's not a huge amount of crossover between RPG fans and Labyrinth fans. There is, of course, a crossover in that Venn diagram, but like that meant that we were making a product that was going to probably be quite a lot of people's first game, and quite a lot of people who weren't coming at it as a child, and which can often afford you a lot of sort of leeway when you're designing for children. I think children are much more able to like push past stuff they don't understand. Children don't understand most things, so they're really used to being like, I'll pick it up from context clues. So the whole thing was like, this is going to be a product that tries to make you buy it or need as few extra things as possible and be presented in the most sort of complete and usable way, and to get you into the fun of role playing as quickly as possible. Yeah, and that's essentially like the brief that we started from, and then I think it was about a year of work working with Ben Milton, who did a lot of the adventure writing. Chris, of course, did a lot of the sort of overarching management. I did the rule writing, which a lot of that job was essentially trying not to write rules, and then some guest writers and things coming in and doing like scenes here and there to tie it all together.
Oh wow. So you said a lot of things, and let me go back a little bit. Let's talk about the dice that's in the book, and
Yes.
I love this symbol. I don't know if you can see it. I'll put an image of it over here so it doesn't look so awkward on video. Um, but I love it. I love that this book, has that little section. Oops, I dropped the bookmark. This has a little section where you could put your dice in there. I think that is super creative. You could just take this whole book with you at anywhere, con or family gathering, and then just start playing. If I may ask, was it difficult convincing the company, like, hey, I would like to have two dice in the book?
So it was. it was less difficult convincing the company and more difficult convincing the producers.
Hmm.
So we went to a few different manufacturers, and essentially the difficulty is it's not a common thing to do. I remember Chris coming in with a box of children's books, things with like click a button to make the cow noise, and this one's scratch and sniff, and this one's pop up, and all of this stuff, and kind of going, somebody's out there doing weird things with books, and like how like we want to do that. There's this opportunity for changing up sort of the way that physical media like interacts with people at the table, and I think that role play is a really really ripe opportunity for novelty. So like I think if you're inventing chess, like you don't want novel weird gimmicks in there, but if you're playing around with your friends at a table and each session is just that, it's a session, you're probably not going to sort of encounter this thing again. Novelty keeps things fresh and it keeps things interesting. And so like just that idea of we played this game and like it has like it's so quirky, it has holes in the book for the dice, and it has these sort of elements that really sort of elevate it into this playful object. And that's like what kids' books do, because they're desperately trying to get kids to read. They're just desperately being like, no, this is fun, and we'll sneak past the reading as we can. And then I think we're sort of also we're trying to do it from a like just it's fun to make objects weird. And so that was part of it. The other part being that we really really wanted this to be sort of the fewest products you needed. We talked about getting the character sheet, like a little pad of character sheets in there, and even like a pen and pencil, sort of, because the thing was shrink wrapped. Because as soon as the dice were confirmed as a thing that was possible, like it became shrink wrapped. Otherwise, every single one would come without dice as someone in the store opened it and they fell out. And so we had that, and sort of we had these conversations, and we ended up with keeping it to the book with the dice sort of inside. But there was definitely this like push to be playful with it. I think one suggestion very early on, which is something we did in the My Little Pony books, which I'm not a big fan of, but I totally get the impetus. Is there's a few pages at the back of that which are random grids of numbers for each of the die types. So you have a D20 and it's like a word search with just random numbers, like a filled out Sudoku puzzle, and you can close your eyes and prod at the page, and you get that's like rolling a D20. And the idea is that if you've bought this book and you're going on a camping holiday because you're like, hey, I want to try RPGs, and this is my first RPG and something to do with the kids, then if you ever get to that barrier that's like, we need dice, like we're kind of done, like we'll just put this away, and that's a terrible sort of thought to have. And so this is kind of the evolution of that, and I think there's something really important about physical dice.
So let's talk a little bit about the character creation in this book, which there's, it's funny now that I think about it just now, there's sort of elements of it that sort of reminds me of Doom Song, your other role playing game, where you could just roll dice to pick who you are in this game. And I find it also interesting that Ben Milton of Questing Beast is also involved in this, because he also likes very like basic, sort of OSR like games. His game Knave, for example, is very basic role playing, I guess you could say. So this has a lot of elements of that as well. So it in a way, if you strip the Labyrinth lore out of it, it feels like another variation. Well, not another variation, but it feels like this is a very quick role playing game you could just create real fast in your table and just have adventures with it. So let's sorry, I've said a lot. I feel like giving you 4 questions at once. So let's start at the beginning. I apologize. Character creation. How did you develop it? And for those that haven't seen the book or read the book yet, what is it exactly?
So we had this idea very early on, that we wanted character creation at the very beginning to be essentially choose what weirdo you are and maybe a unique thing about you, and then go. And like you'll work out the rest on your way. I'm a big believer in character creation kind of being the barest bones to get you playing, because I think that character motivations and backstories and all of this stuff are so much easier and so much more fluid when they sort of come out of play. If you go halfway through your second session and like you're playing an elf from foreign lands, and the GM's like, "Oh, what do your elves think of the fact that they're immortal and living longer than everyone else?" And suddenly you're thinking about that thing and how it influences your character. And these are sort of things that you wouldn't necessarily think of like in character creation, or if you were, like, it would take a long time, and that's time that, especially again as you're pushing this towards a new player, so this is their first interaction with an RPG, and it's definitely the first interaction with your RPG, like trying to get them out of the gate and into the role-playing part, but with enough support that they don't feel like they're just, oh, now pretend to be a goblin, which is another bit that's intimidating. You asked, like right at the beginning, you said you were curious about the fact that it was adventure game rather than sort of RPG, and part of that is very much that trying to get away from the scarier, more technical language, and sort of have this thing on a shelf and for you to go, because a fair few people have seen RPG, and everyone, when they hear RPG, the one they've almost certainly heard of is Dungeons and Dragons, and that's quite an intimidating beast for a lot of players, especially a lot of people that, like, they're not 13-year-old kids, they are adults who enjoyed Labyrinth as a child, and so they want this thing that is like Labyrinth first and foremost. And so when we were doing character creation, we wanted it to be playful, and it's super simple, but we also wanted to leave this room for growth. And so one of the very original ideas that sort of got pared back because it wasn't needed as strongly as we thought it might be, was that essentially in each chapter we sort of layer on a bit more of the rules. So one of the original ideas was that, so in chapter 1, you've essentially got your, hey, I'm a character, I'm this race, which gives me some special ability, and I have a special, a thing that I'm good at. I'm good at climbing and jumping. I'm good at creating, tapestries or whatever. And so, sort of having that very basic, which the system is super simple. We pretty much fit it on the bookmark that comes with the book. That's like 90% of the game, and that's very intentional. And so the idea was that we would kind of maybe even have a break, like during the second chapter, where we go, okay, we're going to introduce this sort of spendable resource like luck points, or we're going to introduce this sort of new facet to the rules that you weren't playing with before, but maybe sort of gives you a bit more of that game aspect and a little less of the straight improv. But honestly, with Ben's OSR style, which is sort of what we were definitely like aiming for, because I think that OSR is actually a really good like entry point for role-playing games. I think it's an excellent game as well, just generally, game style as well, just generally. But I think as well for a new player, trying to keep the stats low and focus on what do you do, how do you investigate the thing, how do you interact with this world, is a really good way of presenting that to players. And so we ended up dropping most of the sort of progression into a sort of more complex system throughout the game, in favor of, let's just keep it simple. And there is still progression, but it's done through like weird and wonderful things happening to your character. You drink a potion and you grow an extra arm. You spend some time playing like chess with a giant, and you gain this new ability. From now on, you've been knighted, so everyone must call you sir or dame, and like having all of these like characterful in-game reasons to sort of level up or change your character, rather than having a system that everything sort of loops back to, like XP or level progression or that sort of thing.
I want to talk about like an example of maybe of a skill check or a combat using the 2 dice. But before I talk about that, I have to ask. It's been in the back of my mind like this whole time, so I'm not going to ask the question now. So Labyrinth, the true canon of Labyrinth, I guess you could say, comes from the movie. But it's funny because the movie doesn't really explain too much about the world. You know, you don't know why there's a labyrinth and there's a castle in the middle of it with a goblin king and horde. Why does he want to exactly want a child? It hints why, maybe as an heir, but you don't know why. Maybe he wants to make another goblin. There's a lot of questions. So but there's not much else outside the movie. There's been a manga series. I think there's been a few comic books here and there, American comic books. Um, so when you and Ben were working together to build this book, what was kind of like the guidelines of like, okay, we don't want to introduce too much new lore without it changing the feel of Labyrinth.
Yeah, so um, the sort of philosophy that we had going in was we wanted the story of the movie to be something that could happen in this game technically. Like, you could sort of say, oh, Sarah, Hoggle, Ludo, and Sir Didymus, they made their characters, and they can make their characters good. Those characters could be made in this game, and then they could go on the adventure that they went on through playing the games legitimately. And so, what we then add on top of that is, so for example, you might come across a part of the labyrinth that is very familiar, is a scene from the movie, but the thing that sort of the crux of that happened in the movie is one result out of 6 in a table. So the idea is that, oh, when Sarah approached this, she rolled a 3. And that's why that happened. But it could have been a 4, 5, or a 6, or it could have been this other thing, that are all sort of taking inspiration from the movie without saying, hey, this is what happened. And I think that Riverhorse's sort of good relationship with the Henson Corporation at the time really allowed us to do a lot of what ifs and pulling out sort of odd bits of the canon. There's essentially the movie, and then there's a few sort of comics and little extra bits around, but they're very much like the movie is the thing everyone's seen. You have to be like a mega fan to have sort of gone into almost any other part of the media. And so those sort of sections kind of become this. You see it a lot with like Lord of the Rings games as well. This idea of like, oh, I know that guy. Oh, I know that thing. And I think that it's dangerous to delve too far into those because, well, it's difficult with licenses anyway to explain role-playing games and be like, we can't protect your canon. Like, we are literally saying you get to choose and you get to make decisions. Like, we can't say that, you can't choose to play as Sarah and, draw a sword and dive into the labyrinth and kill everything you see and rip apart the story as it was told. Like, and so there are places where, like, if that's not explained right, it's really difficult to make anything. Some companies, so when we were working with Hasbro for My Little Pony, they essentially gave us the Badlands, this area of the world that's like not touched in the show, and fine, whatever, come up with whatever you like. And if we decide to go there later, we're going to bulldoze whatever you say and say it's not canon, but you can write there, and that's fine and that's perfect. And then the Labyrinth is sort of more a threading in and out of canon, and like it's a possible story rather than it's the story and you're following Sarah's journey and you do this and then you do that and then you meet the worm and then you do that. Because I think that at the heart of it, you want to play and interact and change and feel like you're in that world rather than you're just following that story, which in the Labyrinth is really, there's certainly a challenge in the fact that the story of the Labyrinth is so simplistic in terms of like, in the first 10 minutes of the movie, maybe a bit more, you are given, okay, you are trying to get to the Goblin City. You have 13 hours. This is your job.
Mm.
and then you are like just sort of an array of scenes in the labyrinth that are kind of fairly disconnected, and very much like that. That was where we came up with the 2-page scene layout of the book, was like kind of from those scenes, the interconnecting bits where Sarah wanders off stage right, and then in the next scene you assume she's gone through a load of turns and is now coming into this next area, is like this very disparate sort of set of scenes in the movie, and so sort of moving that into the way we wrote the Labyrinth, which kind of became a prototype. There's a lot of DNA from the Labyrinth that has ended up in our later work, the Dark Crystal, and of course Doomsong now.
So anyone that, again, who hasn't been familiar with the book or looked at it yet, character creation is really a small part of this book. The rest of it's all adventures. What was it, like over 50? I think I have to try to remember them.
Yeah, so I want to say 100, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, I want to say 100 too, but I don't want
to. So, so it's 36 pages of rules. So that's character creation and everything you need to play, and then over to 200 and 250-ish. So what is that? That's 220. So minus the chapter scenes, yeah, about 100 double page spreads of scenes.
Yeah, which they're not linear at all. There's you could they're all, wow. It's like over over, I'm gonna say over 50, just to be safe, a number, over 50 like different instances that you, just like in the movie, where you just go from one place and then there's a problem to solve of some sort, or an issue or something you have to do before you can move on to the next part of the Labyrinth, which I think that's really brilliant. And character creation, it seems very simple. You just roll a few dice. You get to pick your ancestry, an item, a trait, and so forth.
Yeah, and you mentioned the core mechanic, which is again kind of as simple as it can be. It's based on, so the GM chooses a number between 2 and 6, and the player tries and hits that number with a d6. Like that's most of it. If you have a bonus, such as you have a skill that is helping you out with that thing, then you're rolling 2d6, taking highest. And if there's some sort of major downside, you're taking 2d6 and rolling lower. Advantage, disadvantage, essentially. I believe we call it improved and hindered. That might be Dark Crystal. And so you've essentially got this like super simple base. We mess about with that system sometimes in scenes where we're like, oh, you're now making towers out of the dice, and the dice faces are the difficulty that you're trying to climb up, or like you're getting this bonus for how many things you're trying to steal, or like, so we do mess around with the system very slightly, but that core system is like as simple and as like pure as we could make it, because like, yeah, at its heart, that is kind of what you want. And Labyrinth is kind of helped by the fact that Sarah isn't getting attacked and ripped apart limb from limb. Fieries might be, but it's generally not a thing where combat is a thing, and our only unit of sort of loss is, well, you can lose items, or you can gain sort of you smell forever now, or you can lose an hour. And if you lose 13 hours, then you lose the game. And so like that's kind of the only punishment that you can really sort of physically get, and the idea is that you can fail the game through that way. And I think if you're playing with like a GM who was playing exactly by the rules as they're written, that is something that can come up, especially in the last scene where everything sort of speeds up. But it also kind of works as this like, but a lot of GMs will like realize like when it's fun to punish and when it's not so fun to punish, but you kind of work that out from playing. Like no amount of books telling you, oh, sometimes bend the rules. Like we do say bend the rules. Like that's one of the pages of the 36 rules is essentially you can throw as much of this out as you like,
Mm.
which is a very fun page to write in any RPG.
Mm. And I have to say, I love the adventures and instances there are in this book. I was telling a friend some time ago that even if we never get a chance to play Labyrinth, this is a good resource for game masters or dungeon masters. They're looking for puzzles or something for their dungeons. That most dungeons tend to be like hack and slash type of scenarios, but you're looking for something a little more cerebral, maybe. This book is a great resource, even if you don't want to copy it word for word. But the idea, the inspiration of creating interesting instances or traps, I think it's a lot of fun. Um, uh, oh, sorry, you're gonna were you about to say
Oh,
something?
I was just going to say, yeah. I think the sort of the limitation of the double page spread is a really powerful way of like using layout to force you to distill a scene into its most basic elements, and stop yourself from waffling on. I played a starter set the other day of a game. I'll not name names, but like like 4 pages of dense paragraphs, of just like told almost as a story and trying to like work out what was the information that mattered. Whereas if you say no, if you're in a location, you get 2 A5 pages, like and that has to include a map and it has to include a sort of opening read aloud like section. Like the amount of words you get is tiny. It's like about 500 for each
Mm.
scene. So you are sort of being pulled into, okay, how can I use a table to like elevate this scene? How can I use the tools to sort of cut down on writing a full page of descriptive paragraph, and instead, hey, just a few lines or a few words even of like stinky, sticky, and gross. Like done, cool. That's what that is. Now let's get into the fun stuff, because the GM's going to have to pass it anyway, and is going to have to like present it to their players. I think what that ends up being is like once you've got this is what a scene looks like, it actually becomes a really good like this is almost just a 100 like one shot sort of scenes that a lot of them can be taken out. You could go to the goblin encampment and run that in your like D&D game, for a sort of a silly little like adventure that you've got the stuff that's important in that, and obviously everything is very Labyrinth sort of coded. Everything's light, and there's not many scenes in here that are like the demons of Atranash or whatever. But you are given this resource, and that's something that I think is really good for this game. And similar with Dark Crystal and Doomsong, that 2-page spread means that if something ignites your passion, then you're going, oh, the borders of this are very clear. It's 1 page. So like I can kind of cut around that and put it in my own setting, like very easily, even if there are sections of it that are like, oh, this thing is kind of related to something over here. That's not done in a run-on sentence that you as GM have to be like, oh, okay, what part of this, how do I actually excise this, and how much of it works when I've pulled it out? Because we've said it's the 2-page spread. You pull that out and it'll work. Like if you just take that and pop it into almost any place in your game.
Mm. Now you could also be, or someone can be, the Goblin King. So what is the role of the Goblin King in this adventure game? Are they like a GM light in a sense?
So I think they're GM. They're definitely like running the game and presenting the scenes, and I think the main difference is that there's this kind of philosophy in GMing that is very not looked down on, but I think has a bad rap, of antagonistic GMing, right? Of like us versus them. And I think those can be very toxic and very problematic, or just create bad game situations where the GM wants to win, and rather than sort of create this story. But the GM sort of job, especially in something that's quite like challenge focused like this, is to create those challenges and make them satisfying and try and push back and make sure that failure has meaning and all of these things that the way that can be if it's me, Jack, like saying, no, you fall down a pit and break your leg, can feel quite antagonistic. So what we kind of did with this, which fits in very much with the Labyrinth and fits in very much with us trying to be like, this is your Labyrinth, this is for you to do, is one of the first things the book tells you as the reader to do if you're running this game is make your Goblin King. There aren't any like rules, you don't have stats, but your Goblin King might be David Bowie. It might be an actual sort of goblin-y fella who's like this trickstery puck guy. You might be a centaur. You might be, literally yourself, but wearing a cape. Like, you can sort of create your Goblin King, and that's this sort of flamboyant persona that you can then be a bit of a bastard to the party. Like, oh, it's not me, Jack, that's telling you off. It's Flambio, the Goblin King, who's stolen your hockey stick and has like taken it away. And so it's like this reason to inject that cruelty into the GMing in a very light and friendly way, because obviously it is a very light and friendly game. But it puts that in, and kind of, I think, as well frames what a games master's job is in our world, in our game, in a way that is very sort of quickly understandable to players who are new to the hobby. Like, David Bowie is really close to being this games master in that game. The game he's running is obviously rigged, and but he is like setting it up for Sarah and like sort of pushing his agenda, but kind of playing by his own. But like, he's playing by rules, and it was a good fit. And when we sort of decided to go down that road, it became very obvious very quickly that was sort of the framing that we wanted.
That's amazing. I know it must have been difficult as a rule maker, just because Jareth, again, in the movie, is not very clear. He could manipulate space, he can manipulate time, and maybe reality. But he's also bound by the rules of the game or rules of the book, especially at the end when Sarah says the incantation or the poem, and then everything reverts back. I hope I didn't spoil the movie for anyone. Um, but but yeah, I think that this book feels really really wonderful because it has that really good labyrinth feel. If I may ask, was there anything from the movie that you really really wanted it in the book, and you made sure that it was in the book?
It was kind of every scene. So when Ben sort of started work, I think literally the first thing he did was, watch the movie, pausing every sort of 10 seconds and like taking a note of what was on screen. So like, there's a scene super early on where with the there's all the sort of the sign with all the hands on it, sort of pointing in various directions, and that's like she wanders up to it and sort of goes, "Which way's the Goblin City?" and then like goes off, and some of the hands change, and it's fun. But like, that became a scene that was like, oh cool, we can do a puzzle around that. Like, the hands are pointing to potions and stuff that you can you can find and interact with, and that's just a thing that Sarah walked past, and it's something that your party might just walk past as well. That's certainly up to them. And so like, almost everything from the movie is at least like mentioned, or it's in a table, or it's sort of in the scene in some way. I think one thing that we really sort of wanted to make sure was in there is the main beats, and those sort of become the environments almost. We wanted to make sure that the walled sort of section, the hedge maze, the swamps, the Goblin City, and Jareth's castle were like really represented. And so those sort of became the main areas, and then dotted within that are like so many references to so much of it. Oh, the other sort of main piece of media that we had was an amazing book, Goblins by Brian Froud, that just sort of details the weirdness of goblins, that we were able to use some of the art from, and a lot of the lore sort of from that. So there's like that's where Lunch Ball comes from, which is a game where goblins basically all fight over a big wooden ball, and the first person to eat it wins. And like, yeah, it's just filled with this madcap, ridiculous things. I think one thing that I did really sort of when I saw it, there's a goblin in that book that is his only existence is to be the last goblin in the book, and so I made sure that he is the last goblin in mentioned in the Labyrinth RPG. So let's see. Spurgus, I believe his name was. So in this table of random goblins at the end of the book, make sure that he is the last name in the last entry in the last table, which is something that no one's noticing that, but it just makes me happy.
Mm. So I don't want to spoil the adventures in the book, but I think anyone that's watched Labyrinth knows what to expect, what type of, and what we talked about already about what kind of encounters and problem solving you'll find in the book. But if I may ask, how does the game resolve? Is there obviously there's no I assume there's no 13-hour timer or anything like that, or is there?
Well, so there's a 13-hour timer, but it's essentially in the game. So if you fail a puzzle, or you decide to backtrack, or like you have a chance of losing time. So it's a token essentially that you are losing. So you have 13 lives before you fail, and it is something you can fail if the GM is sort of running it sort of by the book and making sure to punish. But then, sort of the final scene is the castle, and that's kind of, so we sort of throw out a lot of the randomized sort of locations element, and it becomes more of a mini dungeon. And this is kind of part of what we were thinking about when we were doing the sort of the character growth, is kind of almost making the last scene a first like proper dungeon, which it is, but we don't have any of the like combat mechanics or anything like that in there. So it's this sort of run around scene where essentially every round in that scene takes 20 minutes, and a round is basically exploring a room or chasing goblins throughout the corridors. So you take down however many hours you've got left, and that's how long you have to finish off the game. Without spoiling things, you'll have to face off against the Goblin King, prove like your worth to get back whatever they stole from you. And what they stole from you is something you decided right at the beginning of the game. And it can be something shared, or it can be something from each player. And what I quite like about this is that almost everyone sort of chooses something that's a bit tongue-in-cheek or silly. Like in session 1, I had a game where it was a hockey stick that had been stolen, and like that was it was just like, my car keys or my hockey stick, a thing that I want back, and very much like kind of dismissing the idea. And then a few scenes sort of throughout the game, like you find out that the hockey stick was given to her by her mum, who was very ill at the time, and like it's how she made a lot of her friends was through playing hockey, and like it sort of grew this emotional attachment. And so the finale of the game sort of lent a lot of weight to that. And I'm not saying that will happen in every game, but I think that I think anything that allows you to sort of get the embarrassing bit where you have to like make character decisions and interact with this silly children's game out of the way at the beginning, and then you trick them into caring, and you make them actually care. There's a lovely comic that's like it's the D&D character that's like a clown, and he's Blombus the clown, and it's session 1, I'm Blombus the clown, and then session 99 where the rest of the party is like, no, Blombus, you can't hold the door, like, and like they've got all these in jokes, but it's all so real, and he's still called Blombus the clown or whatever, and like I think that's the magic of RPGs. So you get whatever it is back, and you are sort of ejected back into the real world or back into the labyrinth if you are sort of a dwarf or one of the characters that live there. And then in a delightful little touch, this is a new copy, so don't have hours here, but there's this guest book at the end of the game, which you can see Sarah's sort of party have already signed. You've got Sir Didymus and Sarah, Hoggle, Ludo, all sort of have signed their names there. And so you're sort of encouraged to sign your party in, which is this nice incentive for, hey, maybe your next party or your next group, like, and you end up with this guest book that kind of fills out the more times you've played through the adventure. And so and like that kind of really bookends it, and then you go into the best part of role-playing games, which is telling each other about stories and boring all of your friends with game stories about games they weren't in.
You mentioned before that the Dark Crystal adventure game is similar to this.
So I guess it's I would say that like it's almost an evolution into like full-on role-playing game that you would expect from the words role-playing game. So Labyrinth is super rules light, like one of the lightest games out there, and very much like almost it's got sort of dinner party elements and improv games, and like, you know, a bit where you all have to do stuff with your hands or play charades or like solve a puzzle and sort of these elements. Then Dark Crystal is a big map that you are exploring not in a linear fashion, in a sandbox fashion. You know, you can go to any of the regions on this great map and explore locations, and you are trying to essentially stop the darkening, and it's much more a sort of campaign that has like a bit more sort of structure to it. Labyrinth is very much it's randomized, but it's linear. You know, you are starting at position 1 and ending at the Goblin Castle, whereas Dark Crystal is a full sort of adventure, where it sort of shares a lot of the DNA. It shares a bit of the DNA in the system, in that you've got the 1 die, 2 dice if you've got equipment, and 2 dice hindered if you're bad in some way. But then it has just a little more crunch. It has a bit of combat in there because it's a bit more sort of dark fantasy, and sort of I would say that like if you finish Labyrinth and the role-playing game thing is it's got you sort of in there, then Dark Crystal's like your next step towards like that like full, oh, we're going to start caring about how much my equipment weighs and sort of delving into how long my torch lasts and all of that sort of dungeon delving, like role-playing-y, like, classic role-playing-y stuff. Obviously there's a lot of different ways to pretend out there. And then sort of one step further than that, while still, I would say that these are all still fairly like light in terms of the rules load. We generally tend to run a lighter than things like Dungeons and Dragons. But there's sort of one step beyond that is Doomsong, which has much murkier vibes, is much more brutal and terrifying, and is kind of another evolution on from a lot of the stuff that we learned doing Dark Crystal. It was sort of a really interesting like evolution, and I think that we've really like mastered this style that's really become our like in-house style. So the first 2 were done for River Horse, but now we've sort of got this down, and like Lord have mercy upon us, we're really, really happy with, and we're currently working on Thou Shalt Not Suffer the Witch, which is the sequel, which we're sort of twisting the style again and sort of seeing how it can manage like different types of adventures, like investigative adventures and sort of more like focused versus sandbox. There's a lot of interesting like ways to do it whilst still making sure that every important scene is always that 2-page spread.
Did Dark Crystal come first or Labyrinth?
It's Labyrinth, then Dark Crystal. Yeah,
Okay.
in terms of our games, and I think the movies as well, but I wouldn't quote me on that.
The reason why I asked is because I haven't looked at the Dark Crystal adventure game, but I'm curious to do so not just because it's the Dark Crystal, but I'm curious to see the evolution of your rule creation from Labyrinth to Dark Crystal to Doomsong. Maybe that'll be a fun discussion to talk about in the future. Anything about this that you're most proud of in creating this?
So I think for me personally, which I am definitely a small part of this project. I did the rules and sort of a lot of the architecture of how like kind of opening a Google spreadsheet and saying there should be this many scenes in this style, there should be this many scenes in this style, these too close to each other, these are this and that. So I think the thing I'm most proud of is like not stepping on toes and like pulling back. As I said, like there was originally sort of these plans for like a more structured player progression and maybe even a very light sort of fighting system that's like got a little bit of initiative, a little bit of like tactical combat-y stuff, but not like squares on a grid. And so the decision to not do that is always kind of a difficult one because I like games, I like playing, and I like those sort of meta games that role plays have in a lot of the way. And we put a lot of that passion already into each scene can be a meta game. If we want a game like, you know, there's chess puzzles in here, there's like matchstick puzzles, there's throwing dice onto a lawn dart. There's there's so many ways to mess with it, like in a scene, that sort of bloating the front of the book with, oh, and if you ever get into combat, remember that this is the way that it works, when actually we're not expecting anyone to really get into combat. And by saying that you can and this is the way it works, we're incentivizing it. So I think getting out of the way was a huge thing. I think the other thing that is like was very difficult but very much amazing was Chris's work, basically editing and tying together my work and Ben's work to pull it into one cohesive whole. It really feels like it is one piece, one statement that fits throughout the whole game, and everything flows very nicely. The rules into the adventure sort of back into the rules, and yeah, making sure that everyone sort of was on the same page. Definitely took some hard decisions and some scenes, and with the guest writers as well. There was definitely like trying to get someone to sort of write to your template and be like, oh no, this is what we're looking for. We realize it's quite different from a lot of games. It's quite sort of skeletal in some places, but there's also room for you to play around with sort of a novelty and gimmick and being like, oh, if this scene entertains for 10 minutes because it's weird, go for it. That's great. I see a lot of that DNA in Yaziba's Bed and Breakfast. That like mini games as play, and not worrying about, oh, I've got to make this game that will last. You know, I've got to make Dungeons and Dragons a combat game that is going to be the linchpin of every single adventure ad infinitum, and everything's going to feed into this combat game. You can have a silly little game about trying to play tic-tac-toe with Flower Patch, like planting tomatoes and stuff, and that's great. And then you're gone. And then you're like, cool, that did not have to stand up to like to hours of play. You did not have to play that over and over again. We're done with that. We're going to play something else now, and that's exciting and it's different. And that's what I mean when I say like novelty is such a powerful force in RPGs.
Hmm. Oh, so before we wrap up, let's talk about what you have next. I know you have some potential crowdfunding projects in the works.
Yeah, we have a date. October the 14th, we are hitting Kickstarter with Thou Shalt Not Suffer the Witch, which is the second campaign in the Doomsong setting in Panem, where the players will take on the role of witch finders who are trying to basically uncover witches and discover heresy within the fantasy region of Cocytus. It's a game that is macabre, horror themes, but where our sort of last game focused a lot on sort of being the underdogs and the worst of the worst, like these grubby little grave-diggers trying to survive as everything's sort of already gone to hell around them. This game is more about authority and like you're definitely not the good guys, but it's a world that is going to ruin, and so like there are harsh choices that everyone is having to make, and what choices will you make in that world? Meanwhile, like the literal traitor gods are sort of battling over the human soul and ripping apart the world. It's falling to famine. There's a schism in the major religion. Saint Asaph walks in the fields. The day of ruin has come, and everyone's freaking out. Everyone's been freaking out for like 50 years, but now they're freaking out some more. And so that sort of chaotic world that's much more sort of alive and filled with people, which is of course danger and politics, and you're sort of smack bang in the middle of that as like this symbol of authority, but also wielding this power that is maybe like necessary, but dangerous and definitely abused if playtests and players are anything to go by. If you give players any authority, they will immediately abuse it. It's honestly fascinating and a little scary, but it's been a lot of fun to play with. We are, as I say, going live in a couple of months, depending on when this when this pod goes out. And yeah, it's really exciting to sort of be exploring that world again.
Excellent. So I will put all that, all the links for that in the description below this video. Jack, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about Labyrinth, the adventure game. This is available right now through, if you want the digital copy, you can actually get it at Drive to RPG. You know, it's funny, when I first got the book, that wasn't available. But now it is, which is great. So I could do VTT stuff, virtual tabletop stuff with it now. And but yeah, you could still get this at River Horse, their website. I'll put the link for that as well, and to Drive to RPG. Yes, again, Jack, thank you so much, and to our viewers, thank you for watching or listening. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.